Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Restricted Handling Podcast. Today, we have Glenn calling in from somewhere in Eastern Europe that he's going to fill us in on. He's outside on his phone. Glenn, where are you at and what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm sitting in Warsaw, getting ready to jump on a flight. Just left Ukraine this morning. Was there for about a week. Another great trip. Multiple locations, visiting some friends, some new friends, and attending the Black Sea Security Conference, and then speaking at a security conference organized by the Presidential Office of Ukraine in Kyiv. So Black Sea Security Conference was in Odessa, beautiful city on the Black Sea. But while we were there, of course, multiple continued Russian strikes, including in Kiev, which was, I think 11 people died, including some children. One story of a 2-year-old that was killed. He was born during the war and he died during the war. It's kind of a sad story. Yeah. He was killed when his parents were trying to take him to a fallout shelter. So
Jeez.
God rest his soul. Yeah. So it was a good trip. A little intense. I haven't slept in like 2 days. So if I fall asleep, not narcolepsy, it's just.
What are the feelings right now in Ukraine? I mean, there's a lot of reporting that on the battlefield, Russia is not doing well. They just had the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that did not look great. They're having to buy up a lot of reserves. Things are not looking good for Russia. They're looking a little better for Ukraine. What's the feeling on the ground?
Yeah, well, the Ukrainians are having some impact at the mid-strike level with their FPV drones along the front. They're hitting the lines of communication of the Russians, logistics hubs. There's no real impact yet on the Russians, on their supply lines. So the Ukrainians that we spoke with predict that if it continues like this, maybe by the end of the summer, they're going to start seeing the impact on the Russians' inability to get fuel and other equipment to their troops on the front. Obviously, the Ukrainians expect the Russians to find countermeasures or look for countermeasures. So, Ukrainians always tell us, don't underestimate the Russians and their ability to strike back or, spy versus spy world, come up with a solution to the problem. The Russians continue to strike Kiev and other cities with drones. 2 nights ago, there was a mass drone attack. The Ukrainians managed to take out 95% of the Russian drones that were launched, which is a pretty high number. It's very impressive. And that's with Ukrainian-made systems, integrated air defense systems. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians are very low on missile interceptors. And so the Russians are also striking with cruise missiles. Some of they're using the Sarmat, which is actually designed to carry a nuclear warhead. And it seems to me that the Russians don't have the technology for precise targeting. And so they're hitting civilian targets, killing innocent people. As I said, 10 people killed or 11 people killed in the strike 2 days ago. It's tough on the Ukrainians, but they keep pushing through. They keep pushing on, and they're looking. I talked to one of the Ukrainians. Secretary Hegseth came out and said that the U.S. would do everything it could to find ways to supply the Ukrainians with the interceptors they need in response to President Zelensky's plea for help to the President Trump. The Ukrainians are saying, look, we know we have to find solutions for ourselves. So they're building their own systems. They're designing their own systems. And I would predict that by the end of the year, they'll have their own interceptors that will be capable of taking on some of the Russian attacks, Russian systems. The 2 big advantages the Russians have are 3: personnel, like manpower, long-range missiles, cruise missiles, other larger missiles. And then these, in English, it's called a glided cruise bomb, like a Cob in Russian. Copy. They're dropped far from the front, and they are guided into the targets. But the Ukrainians have designed their own now, and the Ukrainians have also signed a deal with Sweden to procure some Gripen fighters, which I've heard from some of the smarter military folks I know that is a very good system, and that may help the Ukrainians defend their front lines and their frontline cities, which are vulnerable to these Cob attacks, better. So we'll see. I would note that the Ukrainians hit St. Petersburg during the SPIEF conference.
Yep.
And then the other war that has been breaking out that people should be following is there's a war going on now between influencers, Loomer, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. Candace Owens was in Moscow. I ran into Laura Loomer's media team when I was in Ukraine. I know some of them, and she just put out something on X yesterday warning Americans that they've been manipulated by Russian disinformation and propaganda which I find very interesting to see. I would tell Americans, pay attention to her on this one. I don't agree with everything she says, but on this one, and it sounds like she realizes that she herself was manipulated for a while. So that,
Wow.
yeah, in the information space, I think that's significant, and we'll see how that combat develops. More words.
One one of the other things I wanted to highlight on that's been reported recently, and I don't know if you know any of these people, like the names, Glenn, but Oleg Saryov, Alexei Chadin, Vasily Kashin, Igor Gherkin, a lot of hardliners, hawks, elites that are now pushing back in whatever way they can against Putin about the war. They're not full on saying they should stop, but they are trying to rein in a little bit of the fighting. They see maybe the detrimental effects on Russia, its future with Ukraine, like the idea that they could one day um, lead Ukraine somehow with a puppet government is less and less likely given all the fighting and hardship they're putting Ukraine under. The fact that these people are coming out right now, I think, is pretty surprising. It seems, and maybe that's part of this information war that you just referenced.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of pressure on Putin from what we can see. Although you got to be a little bit careful. Some people will warn that this is just a disinformation operation being conducted by Putin to make people think in the West that he's in trouble and that they need to take pressure off of him if they want to make a peace deal. They've done that before. So, but I do think listen. I mean, the economy is in very bad condition. The Ukrainians continue to extend the range of their deep strikes. Uh, the Russians are not making progress on the front. And I think this, economic forum was kind of a bust for the Russians. Not only did they not get a regular turnout, and I doubt it will result in any real investment in the Russian economy. But the Ukrainians struck a target, I think, 10 kilometers from where the event was, which should be humiliating to Putin and his air defense forces.
Hey, just fresh out of coming out off of the front, I mean, not the front lines, but coming out of Kyiv, Odessa, Ukraine, what would you be telling the administration right now with what you've seen and what to do over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, look, I've been saying this already. It's time to double down on the Russians. The Ukrainians have, unlike in December of last year, we were telling them that the front's going to collapse on them. They should make a deal, even though it's a bad deal. They've been able to hold the line and take back some territory. So they have some. Let's just say some of the cards that we heard the famous phrase, "You don't have the cards." They do have some cards. Again, I heard from the Ukrainians on this trip. They're ready to make a deal, but it has to be a fair and just deal. They're not asking for everything they want, but they're willing. They're willing to make some compromises. So I do think the administration and the president needs to put pressure on Putin now. I mean, it's time to ratchet up the pressure from the United States and set an example for everybody. One thing I will say is it was a little bit disappointing at these two conferences to hear a lot of people, especially our European partners, basically assessing that the U.S. is done with Europe and U.S. can't be relied on. The U.S. is not a reliable partner. Now, some of that I think is hyperbole. Some of it I think are some of our European counterparts wanting to step in and take the lead. It's some of it though.
France?
Different people. This is not government officials. These are academics. These are people from think tanks, former government officials. But what I would say is actually, I think I wouldn't rush to make that conclusion. In fact, I read today that the administration is holding discussions with the Europeans on placing more nuclear weapons in Europe. So increasing our nuclear presence as part of our, nuclear umbrella to reassure the Europeans that we're not leaving them. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what's being reported in the media. So that's a good news story. But Americans should know that there is a sense that we are not reliable partners. And we hear that from the Ukrainians. I started hearing that late last year, say December when I was there, and we continue to hear it. It's not resentment. As a matter of fact, you'll see on the podcast with Artis, he said, nobody owes us anything, right? I was really surprised
Yeah.
to hear him say that. This is up to us. But as an American, I don't like to hear anybody say that once the U.S. is an ally, that they can't count on us. That's sad.
And then there was news that Hungary has kind of reopened the idea of EU accession for for Ukraine, even though a 10 to 15-year time horizon. It's still, I think, a big win that the European bloc is coming around to help. And then there was reporting from, I think, 2 weeks ago in Armenia. Rubio goes in and signs this strategic partnership, putting a little more pressure on Putin. And obviously, Armenia has this election coming up, and there's a lot of influence operations going on targeting that. So there's a lot going on in the periphery as well with Europe and Central Asia, as we've talked about.
Yes, there was also reporting that the Russians are resupplying their bases in Syria, which is concerning. That's a little frustrating to see that's happening and that we're allowing it to happen. In my opinion, we should be putting pressure on al-Shah to stop that, the Syrian president and his government. And yes, Armenia, we definitely need to watch Armenia. We've had guests on to talk about that issue. And we'll have some more guests on to talk about, the South Caucasus and how important it is. But the Armenians are facing definite pressure from the Russians. They've been basically threatened by the Russians that they have to decide between the West, Europe, and U.S. and Russia. And then the other country to watch is Belarus. A lot of rhetoric coming out of Minsk, threats from the Belarusian president. The Ukrainians are watching the northern border very closely. And we'll have to find a good guest to come on and talk about that too, because doesn't get enough attention in the U.S.
What's going on with Iran in talks over there, Glenn? Like, what are you hearing in these security summits when it comes to Iran?
Well, as a matter of fact, the Shah's son was in Odessa. He was a guest speaker. Yeah, he was a guest attendee. What are we hearing? The Ukrainians remain concerned that the price of oil is up. That's it's hurting them economically. It's hurting a lot of people economically. And it's distracting attention from their cause. But I heard again and again from the Ukrainians, they understand why we're doing what we're doing. They're supportive. They continue to offer assistance. Ukrainian specialists are still going to the Middle East, counter drone experts, and offering assistance to the U.S. I think most of what I heard is that, the U.S. has learned in this conflict that we're behind the curve and we need to learn quicker from some of the examples that they're learning, and they're willing to share that knowledge, and that the Europeans are behind the curve. We saw Romania was hit by a drone, which was probably launched at Odessa, and my assessment is it was probably disabled or what do we want to say? Using electronic warfare systems, the Ukrainians protected themselves, but it flew into Romanian airspace, and the Romanians didn't deal with it well. They were not prepared. It tells me there's a lack of integration, air defenses between Ukraine and NATO. And so, the Romanian government's facing a lot of criticism over that. And we saw that in the Baltics recently. We've seen it in Poland before. If you remember last September, when there were, I think, 15 or 17 stray drones that went Polish airspace. So,
two quick things on drones that I saw. One, as I was preparing the video with Artiste, I dug up some drone footage. One of them was even for me, who, like, as an attack pilot in my past, having taken shots at humans, it was pretty sobering to see like a UAV from above looking down at another very small UAV circling a tank that just got close to a human and detonated. I mean, when you see something like that, it is really frightening what those things can do on the battlefield. And this guy could do nothing. He was running around a tank until this thing got close enough and just destroyed him. And then separately, there's talk about Hezbollah was just using FPV drones with thermal imaging at night over the past 2 days, obviously in its fight with Israel. That's another thing that I don't know if I've heard a lot about in Russia being used, but I know Hezbollah and Iran have some pretty advanced UAV capabilities. The thermal side with FPV is also pretty scary to hear.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, right? It's a non-state actor, although it has state support from Iran. Not surprised that they have that. I think the Israelis have been caught off guard. The Israelis, like us, made the mistake of not having the counter drone defenses in place. They're quickly scrambling to, do a better job to protect their troops that are in Lebanon now, defending their northern border. Some of my Lebanese friends are very concerned about what Hezbollah has been doing. Of course, where are they getting the equipment from? Iran and Russia. So, as I've said before, there's like these axes of these alliances, and there's the axis of evil, I'll call it. I hate to sounds so stupid. Sounds like a cartoon thing, but Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and then the U.S., Israel, Ukraine, our European allies. So definitely, Ryan, and I keep telling people, I just got to keep beating this drum. Our critical infrastructure in the U.S. is no longer safe. There's no setback like we used to have. The Atlantic and the Pacific are not the barriers that they were, in the Second World War or even the Vietnam War. Non-state actors, state actors can strike targets in the U.S., and we need to be better prepared to deal with that, in my opinion.
It seems like Iran is using Lebanon very effectively as a bargaining chip now. So we've got the nuclear talks, we've got Hormuz getting reopened, there's sanctions relief, but Lebanon as a sticking point with Hezbollah in particular. Any surprises there to you?
No, I mean, I think the negotiations are ongoing, so it looks like they're moving towards, the government of Lebanon and Israel are moving towards a peace treaty, which is what the administration wants. That's good. But the question remains of whether we're going to allow Hezbollah to maintain its arms. I think the official position of the U.S. government, Marco Rubio and the president, is that Hezbollah will not be allowed to keep their arms, and we need to help the Lebanese legitimate government of Lebanon de-arm Hezbollah, because if they don't, then the Israelis will continue to wage war against Hezbollah because Hezbollah is attacking Israel, right? It's an immediate threat to the state of Israel. It has been for many years. So I think the tricky part here all along has been getting the Lebanese government to do what they need to do and enable them to do what they need to do. And there's a lot of nuance here. We talked with Ambassador Hale. There's, I'd say, some progress happening, but I think there's a lot of concern that Hezbollah is going to be allowed to survive, which is the mistake we made in 1991 when we allowed them to keep their arms. So my personal view is I hope we don't let that happen, and I hope we don't let the Iranians look. I mean, I think what it's coming down to, a lot of people are putting pressure on the president, which I think is a mistake. They're attacking the president on his policy of Iran towards Iran for political reasons, not thinking about the long-term consequences. We as a country need to stand together on this. Iran, the Islamic regime, has been our enemy. We need to defeat that enemy, and their proxy is Lebanese Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. We need to defeat them. We can't let them maintain their arms and then reemerge. I mean, look what Hezbollah was hit badly by the Israelis in the last couple of years, and they still managed to get their hands on these FPV drones we're talking about and strike targets. That just tells you they're resilient. So we need to be more resilient.
I know you got to catch a flight, Glenn. Anything else that you think people need to hear from your trip?
I mean, listen, always inspiring to go to Ukraine, but also, we can't take our eye off that issue. And, by the way, before I was in Ukraine, I was in Dubai. I mean, it was empty. I was there for a couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah, the airport was empty. So, the economies in the Gulf are struggling, not struggling, but they're having a harder time than usual. So we got to keep an eye on that as well.
Sounds good. Yeah. And Cuba, I think people just need to keep an eye on that. They're going 20-hour day blackouts. Lots of heartache there right now. Who knows what's going to happen?
Wow. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chief. Safe travels. Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.